Hello and welcome to today's event, How to Succeed in Rapidly Expanding and Evolving Infrastructure and Operations. Today's event is brought to you by Nutanix and produced by Actual Tech Media. On this event, you'll learn how Nutanix helps you calm choppy IT operations. This event is part of the Nutanix Better Together webcast series. Before I introduce today's expert presenter, I want to remind you that this series is a 5-part series, and in the first part of the series, you learned about the journey to the private cloud. That was back in January. You should have received an invitation to watch that event on demand. The second event in the series was Nutanix on Nutanix Data Center Consolidation in Action. This was a really cool event where you learned about how Nutanix uses IT internally. They use everything about the Nutanix solution, software-defined storage, networking, everything, and they talked about in detail how they use that to succeed internally in their own IT organization. You should have also received an invitation to view that on demand. On today's event, you'll learn, again, how to succeed in a rapidly expanding and evolving infrastructure and operations world. This is the third event in the series. After today's event, you'll receive invitations to upcoming events entitled Protect Your Heterogeneous Applications and Data Services, as well as the final event on March 19th, which is Essential Security Considerations for Building Your Private Cloud. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media. I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. We want this to be a really educational event. We have an expert presenter who I'll introduce you to in just a moment, but we are here to answer all of your technology questions, your toughest enterprise IT challenges, I like to say. So feel free to use that questions box there. It's just to the right of the handouts tab. You should see a list of handouts and resources there on your console. Just to the right of that, it says questions. If you click on that questions tab, you can type in your question there. There's lots of comments already coming in. Thank you, everyone. Hello from around the United States and around the world. Thank you for all the great feedback and comments coming in. If you have questions during the presentation, of course, please use that. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event, so we welcome your technology questions and your enterprise IT challenges. I will talk about the prizes here in just a moment, but I also want to remind you about the handouts that are listed there in the handouts tab. We have links to the Nutanix DevOps site, the Nutanix test drive, the Nutanix ebook that you can download on why DevOps is so hard, the Nutanix private cloud ebook, and the ROI story ebook, all of which are really excellent resources. I encourage you to check those out. Just click on them and they will automatically download to your local computer. Now, when it comes to prizes, each person who registers for any one of the events in the series receives a $5 Tango gift card. You don't receive a Tango gift card for every event that you register for. And I should clarify, every event that you attend, you receive one Tango gift card for the entire event series. But the more that you attend, the better chance you have of winning the grand prize drawings. We already gave away one of 2 MacBook Pro laptops. These are the new 16-inch laptops. And so every time you attend, that increases your odds. The final drawing for that grand prize will be on the final event, which is March 19th. So, of course, make sure you attend all the events, but especially that event, because that will be the final grand prize drawing. The prize terms and conditions can be found on the Actual Tech Media website. There's a link to that in the bottom of the handouts tab. All grand prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. And with that, I'm excited to introduce today's expert presenter. That is Mayank Gupta, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Nutanix. Mayank, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Dave. To the people on the call, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. Wherever you are on the globe, it's exciting that you've taken the time from your day to listen about how do you actually go about evolving and expanding your IT infrastructure and making it autonomous. As Dave already alluded in earlier, this is a 5-part series, and the premise here is that you are on Nutanix, or at least you have some familiarity with Nutanix. because some of the tools that I would talk about and some of the things which I'll show to you today are very much in the context of Nutanix. That being said, I'll also show how some of them you can use across multiple clouds and multiple hypervisors, but some familiarity with Nutanix definitely helps. Again, you might have seen this slide. This talks a little about who we are as Nutanix. We essentially deliver a platform for you to run any application on any of the clouds. In the first presentation, which you must have heard as a part of this series, you should have learned about HCI and how it helps essentially modernize your traditional IT and traditional infrastructure. And the second session in the part of these talks was around storage, which again my colleague Devin talked about. This one is very near and dear to my heart. This actually talks about automation and operations. So this is, as you can see in the stack here, so it's HCI on the bottom, then you have securing the environment, consolidating data through different storage solutions. And then once you have all of this, the immediate need comes around automation. And that's something on a lot of IT architects, a lot of CIOs' mind. How do we go about managing IT and infrastructure at a scale? And that's what primarily today's talk is going to be about. Now, here at Nutanix, and I'll show this through a demo as well, we believe that simplicity is the key for you to manage IT at a scale, right? So Nutanix as a platform, we are hypervisor agnostic. That means we support VMware ESXi, Microsoft Hyper-V, or even Nutanix AHV, which is our built-in hypervisor. And what you could see here, in fact, in the screenshot that you see, you can already see that the example that I'm showing you is uses an ESXi hypervisor, right? But what you also see about the dashboard that I'm showing here, which I'll also show in the demo, is that it's very elegant. It's very clean. It's not cluttered. We use the next HTML5 for our GUI. You log into a console. It's very easy to understand and manage. So, and we spend a lot of time in the design of the UI because we know that as IT architects, you have so many things to do. In fact, before we introduce any features, there is an explicit mandate from our design team that it shouldn't be more than 3 clicks to launch a new feature. Like, we tried a lot to ensure that. Same, the Apple-like philosophy, like make the design very important, simple and easy to understand. So what you're looking here is an example of the single pane of glass, what we call Prism, and it uses a lot of AI, ML, specifically from your data center to help make you educated decisions. One of the things which a lot of people would talk about, especially if you are Nutanix customers, hopefully you are, that's why you are listening to this automation talk, is how Nutanix helps you do non-disruptive software upgrades. So you don't have to bring down your clusters and you can actually do seamless upgrades in your clusters. I'll also talk about the anomaly detection and remediation and how do you manage infrastructure at a scale. So again, that's a preview of what's coming. Now let's talk about why do we need intelligent ITOps for enterprise cloud. Again, some of the reasons is to gain efficiencies, make sure that your resources and their utilization are optimal, but also the things which I'll cover today is not just your IT management of your IT infrastructure, but delivering services to your end users, right? These would be developers. These would be people who need your infrastructure for applications or so you as IT leaders, as IT architects, as IT admins, you need to deliver those services to your end customer. And how do you go about delivering a better service quality? Again, operations productivity, yes. How do you improve your productivity? Something which is fairly interesting, and you can also see at the bottom line here is that Gartner predicts that in the next 2 years, which is by 2022, 60% of the companies using HCI will have some form of AI ops built into their infrastructure. This primarily comes from the fact that now HCI allows you to do so much more. You actually need a machine to help you monitor, manage, and optimize the end-to-end performance as well as the availability of the hybrid systems and applications that your organization uses. So you need a tool which can help you manage things at a scale, right? That's where the need of intelligent IT ops comes in. Now, things which I'll cover in today's session, I wanted to call out the products by name. Usually it's a use case because we want to drive solutions around how you use it, but in case you're curious which products map to what solutions I'm going to talk about, I'll primarily talk about two products, Prism Pro and Calm. And Prism Pro is mostly for IT operations, and Calm is for quality of service, application lifecycle management. You also see Zybeam here, and one of the fundamental tenets here at Nutanix is business outcomes. And what Zybeam helps you do is it gives you a sense of cost governance in terms of where are your resources are being spent. So I'll slightly touch upon Zybeam, but primarily this talk today is structured around Prism Pro and Calm and the challenges that they address, right? So we'll talk about them primarily. So let's jump right in. So the first product that I'm going to talk about, again, from a use case basis, what Prism Pro does, it helps you efficiently utilize your resources and automate a lot of things. And let's talk about these things, right? So the first step, which comes as just-in-time forecasting. Now, what is that? Essentially, if you remember, the first key challenge that we have discovered is that how to keep resources being used efficiently. Now, for that, IT teams need to have a clear understanding of how their capacity is being used and also make an accurate forecast on what their businesses demand, right? And they want a real-time insight into this so that they avoid any waste. So what Prism Pro does, it provides you the right answers to these very exact questions. Let's talk about two needs, right? Which demonstrates the clear understanding of why these forecasts are needed, right? So first of all, this is something which is powered by purpose-built machine learning engine, what we call CrossFit. Prism Pro constantly analyzes and learns how the running workloads consume compute and storage because it's running on your infrastructure. Now, with this knowledge, what Prism Pro can do, it can show you and help you understand your runway. Essentially, your runway is a forecast of how well your existing capacity will meet the future business needs. And this number not only gives you, the customer, a clear understanding of how the capacity is being used in terms of storage, RAM, or memory, but it also allows you to prepare and optimize your cluster as the time passes by. Something else which I'll also show in a demo is that when you as the customers or IT leaders have to expand your cluster, right? Let's say you're onboarding a team or you have acquired a company and you have to make their resources a part of your infrastructure. What Prism Pro does, it gives you an intuitive and powerful tool to analyze different workloads and then plan for adding those capacities at particular days. Again, I'll show this in an example in which what we do is by selecting a particular workload and a particular date on when you are onboarding that workload, you can actually see how your resources change and how you need to adjust for those resources. So hold it for the demo, and I think it's much more easier to understand once I show it in a demo, right? The next step, which a lot of IT admins I have talked to face-to-face, is one thing that you have to do is create reports, and these are reports for your infrastructure. Essentially, they tell the CIO or the CFO, hey, this is how my resources are being spent, and at a date, I need to buy these things, right? Now, what we do is, instead of you taking screenshots, creating all these things again and again, via Prism Pro, you can create not just a customizable dashboard for how your pane of glass would look like, but you can also create PDF reports on the real-time status of your system. Why is it helpful? Because then you can schedule those reports to your bosses or the CFO and say, hey, look at my cluster. It's running at 90% utilization. There is no argument about that because here's a clear graph, and this is why I need the resources that I've been asking for, right? So the benefit to the end user is it essentially provides an easy access to the system status, and you get the operational insights at your fingertips. Again, these reports are completely customizable. You want to put your logo, you want to put anything that's your discretion. And essentially, it saves you time. Time and again, I've talked to IT admins who have taken screenshots of their dashboards because that's what they had to send to their managers, right? Because you can customize these reports to whatever views that you like and schedule them, you don't have to do that anymore. So that's a good, that is definitely a very handy tool. Now, what I'll do is I have 3 demos planned, and instead of breaking again and again, I'll do all of the demos at the same time. So the flow is more smooth. So let's go to the next part. This is again fairly interesting on why Prism Pro actually helps you recoup lost capacity, right? So essentially using our optimized automation, which is again backed by some of the regression and machine learning that we're doing on your infrastructure, we can identify which of your VMs are over-provisioned, which of your VMs are under-provisioned, which of your VMs are constrained for resources. And once you have an insight into that, you can immediately address those issues and have a healthier cluster, right? So for example, if you are, just take the first example of over-provisioned VMs. Let's say you're running at 90% of your resources, but you have 10 over-provisioned VMs. What you can go into your cluster, quickly identify these over-provisioned VMs, as I'll show you in the demo, and then recoup this capacity which is essentially being wasted. And with that, now you can have a better resource utilization so that your cluster can run longer, right? So that's where having this tool at your fingertips is very useful. What we also do is, what you can see in here is proactive alerting by anomaly detection. Again, instead of talking hypotheticals, let's talk about a concrete case, right? A lot of times as IT admins, you're dealing with warnings. There are like 10 warning signs or red flags all of the time. Some of them are real and some of them are not. To give you an example, let's say you run backups on your system every Saturday. So on every Saturday, what's going to happen is the storage and the memory usage would immediately go up. Now, if you have set an alert saying that, give me a warning whenever my storage uses or my CPU or memory uses go above 50%, that scheduled task which is going to happen on a Saturday would flag a warning. Now, should that happen? No, that should not happen, because anything which is intelligent enough would realize that, hey, that's a predicted task which I schedule. So what Prism Pro does is understands from the patterns in your infrastructure. For example, as you can see in the curve that I've shown here, there are periodic spikes in your infrastructure, which is the solid blue line that you can see here, right? And what we do is, by learning from the periodicity and by learning from your infrastructure, we draw this blue band. And once things are in the blue band, we know that that's not an anomaly. So here's an example of an alert system which is intelligent enough to learn about your infrastructure, the idiosyncrasies of your infrastructure, and then automatically adjust the warnings so that you are not overwhelmed with warnings and you can manage that. Further, as you can see, there's lots of tabs in here. You can actually set thresholds for when you want a warning, as a critical alert, as just a warning, and all those things. So again, you built on top of this machine learning and AI are also bells and knobs that you can custom adjust as you like it, because these are something which are specific to your system. Again, I'll hold off to, actually, you know what, let's do a quick demo, because I've talked a lot and there's nothing like a quick demo to re-engage you. If you have questions, please, as David said, you can pop them. Let's do this. So what I'll do is I'll log into a Prism cluster. So we are logging in live. So if something breaks, you would know this is not a recording and this is live. So here we have logged into a cluster, and what you can see in this cluster is, this is the name of the cluster. You can see, as I already talked about earlier, the over-provisioned VMs, the constrained VMs, the inactive VMs, and the bully VMs. You can see that, and you have all the information in one single pane of glass. As I talked earlier, you can actually add widgets to these dashboard and customize to the view to your own specific preference, whichever way you like it. Now, I talked about capacity planning. So the way you access this, and the reason I'm showing you is by the end of this talk, there's a URL called testdive.nutanix.com. You can actually go and we'll spin up a cluster for you and you can actually try these things out. So take this as like an online tutorial on how you navigate yourself. So once you go into this, you see an operations tab and it has a planning tab in here. And this Prism Central instance is actually managing a lot of clusters. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 clusters here. Let's go into the Astro cluster. And again, what you're seeing here is the runway for this particular cluster. So you see that we have a storage runway of over a year, same with CPU, but the memory is constrained and you only have a runway of 432. And what we do is you can see the time axis here. So you see today, which is today's time. And what we're doing is this is your historic. This is how this cluster has behaved in the past. And using that, we are predicting the future. So with that, you can actually see how much of a runway you have in your cluster. Something that you can do is optimize resources. So let's say you do not have enough runway. So when you hit optimize resources, Prism Pro immediately shows you where you can go and get this capacity back. For example, now you see 64 over-provisioned VMs. Now let's click that. So once we click that, here is a list of all the VMs that we can see. For example, if you take the first case, let's just take the first case of an over-provisioned VM, right? What is an over-provisioned VM? So here we see that for this VM, so whoever the person who requested this VM, the CPU usage is a minuscule 0.5%, right? So essentially, we have allocated a lot of vCPUs to it. The resources on this are not being used. So this is a good example of where you could recoup some stranded capacity and get back some resources, right? So it was very intuitive for you to immediately zero down on where your resources were being wasted so that you can get back capacity. Similarly, something that you can do is when you go into operations, you have reports. This is something that I talked about earlier. We have a bunch of pre-canned reports, so the environment summary and cluster summary, and then what you can do is you can create custom reports, and you can also schedule these reports at suitable times so that whenever you want them, you can get those reports. So let's go to operations, analysis. Here's again information about how your cluster is behaving, some of the warnings and critical alerts of your system. You can see that as well. So here's an example of the 1 and 2 demos that I wanted to show you on how you go about doing it. Now, the next thing which I'm going to show you is something which honestly I'm very excited about. This is more tangible automation, right? So yes, we have capacity planning, a lot, and report generation as well as anomaly detection. This one, when I've showed to IT admins, they've really stuck back and said, hey, this is really cool. So let me talk about the operational automation piece that comes as a part of Prism Pro. Again, if you have Nutanix, I highly recommend, I can't recommend enough, that you try out this feature and try it for yourself, and this will radically simplify the way you manage infrastructure, right? So essentially, one of the challenges that we have talked earlier is how do you minimize service interruption, right? You have to do a lot of things. There are 100 VMs in your infrastructure. Let's say there are 200 VMs. If there's steps that you do again and again, how do we automate them, right? Now, a key aspect to minimizing service interruption is not being reactive. You can't be reacting to all the issues all the single time, right? So what we have done here is with we call this cross-play. You can set up a playbook. Now, what is a playbook? Playbook is essentially you set up triggers in your infrastructure, which is to say, let's say I'm short on VM, I'm short on memory for my VM, or let's say I'm short on CPU for my VM. So, and there are numerous alerts here, or let's say I have an update, that's a trigger. So any alert that you get from your system, that could be a potential trigger. And with that trigger, you can define a set of actions to take. Again, this is not coding. It's what we call almost codeless programming, when you don't have to code anything. It's very simple, intuitive blocks which you just put next to each other, and you save and enable this. And once these things are saved and enabled, the next time that alert comes, you as the end user don't have to do anything. The machine will take care of whatever steps that you defined and then notify you that I took that action. Now, this is very powerful. When you're managing hundreds of VMs, it becomes a very good story. So the way I'll show you is, again, I'll quickly do a demo here because this really shows very well. So let us go back to the cluster which I was showing earlier. So here is an example. If you go to operations, this is playbooks, right? As I talked about. So there are pre-existing system playbooks which I have shown here. But what you could also do is, and with each of this playbook, as I said, there are triggers and actions. Now these actions could be sending you an email. It could be PowerShelling, and if you have pre-existing scripts that you want to run via a PowerShell command, you can do that. You can turn off VMs. You can power on VM. You can use REST APIs. You can send a Slack message. So again, you can add CPUs to VM or add memory. There are lots of steps that you can do. Essentially, at the end of the day, you are limited by your creativity. We have given you a lot of actions that you have done here, and we're constantly adding to this. You can actually schedule tasks as well. And with that, you can really simplify a lot of tasks. Now, let me show you a good example of how this goes. The reason I'm only showing a video here instead of doing a live demo, because I need to create an anomaly, and it's hard for me to create an anomaly in a live system, so I'll have to show a video here. But bear with me, it's a very good example of how, as IT admins, this would really automate and simplify things in your day-to-day infrastructure. So we go here. Here's an example of a Prism Pro window that you're seeing here. And what I'm showing here is you can have, these are these plays and playbooks. So let's go and define a playbook, right? As I talked about, playbook is about setting triggers, defining a set of actions, and you save and enable them. So the way you create them is get started. And here's an example of a playbook which removes a memory constraint. So when there is a memory constraint, we'll take a VM snapshot, we'll add memory to that VM, then we'll send an email as well as Slack to the end user that, hey, the Prism Pro saw a memory constraint and it took these steps, so that you are always aware of what steps the machine took, right? So let's go to the list of VMs. So here are a list of VMs that you can see. So if you look at the bottom VM, which is called Tomcat, it has 9 GB of memory, right? Now what we'll do is, through a script, we'll log into this VM and create a memory constraint, right? So this script is called Train Trigger. And what you're seeing here is that without me as the IT admin doing anything, the memory went from 9 GB to 10 GB, right? So here's an example of machine taking care of something that you would have done as an IT admin, and this greatly simplifies your job because that's exactly what you would have done, right? So let's go back and look at the steps that the machine took because you want to have an audit trail. So here you see an alert was received, it took a VM snapshot, it sent an email, and the email was that, hey, I saw that the VM was constrained and I added 1 GB of memory to it, right? So here's an example of email that went out, which goes to your inbox. So that way you are completely aware of what automation step that it took. Here at Nutanix, we use Slack a lot, so you can also get a Slack alert, right? So again, very good example of what automation should mean. It should be intuitive, it should be understandable, and you should control the outcomes. And that's exactly what you do in a playbook, because we want to build upon the knowledge that you as an IT admin have on, hey, if the VM is short on memory, let me add some memory to it, right? But again, you decide what the actions are, and then you determine the outcome. So very good example. And when you get a chance after this webinar, go test it out on the test drive. So let me stop sharing and go back to the webinar. So this was an example of automation operation. I already showed you the example of that. Now something else that I want to talk about is Calm. So right now, before this, what I talked about is from an infrastructure perspective, how do you manage alerts, how you plan for capacity, and how do you remediate some of these actions which happen on your infrastructure. Now, I see 374 people are logged in today, right? And many of you have developers as your end customers, because at the end of the day, they are creating applications which you're using. Or even I'm hoping that some DevOps people are also on the line, right? And what Calm does, it essentially enables higher productivity as well as self-service for your IT admin. So for your infrastructure. So let me just quickly click through these points and talk a little more here, right? So what Calm does, it provides application automation as well as lifecycle management for Nutanix powered private cloud, as well as it could be also running on a third-party public cloud. So as far as Calm is concerned, it doesn't have to run just on Nutanix. It can use any third-party public cloud as the underlying infrastructure as well, because your developers want to deploy applications on different clouds. So you can use that as well. So long as you have Prism Central and you have Calm enabled in that, your infrastructure could be Nutanix or it could be others. Whereas for Prism right now, Prism Pro right now, it's specifically targeted for a Nutanix infrastructure. So there is a slight distinction that I wanted you to be aware of, right? So let's talk about the 3 bullet points that I illustrated here, right? The first is self-service and governance. Essentially, with Calm, what you can do is publish blueprints. These are rule books to different groups in your team, and using a self-driven policy model. So you can determine, hey, which groups can use these blueprints, and I'll talk a little more about what blueprints are. And what happens is there is less miscommunication between teams, and now with self-provisioning, they can actually go ahead and provision applications all by themselves. So you don't have to handhold everything for them. And I'll actually show you an example of that in a demo as well on how this becomes very powerful. The next construct here is application lifecycle management. As IT admins, things that you're doing a lot of times are just managing the lifecycle of an application, right? With Calm, you can simplify the setup as well as management of custom enterprise applications by incorporating all elements within each app, including relevant VMs, configuration, related binaries, and all this would be done via blueprints, right? By making the deployment and lifecycle management of common applications automated and easily repeatable, the infrastructure team, which is listening to this, they can definitely eliminate hours and days of time that is devoted to just routine application management, right? So you can greatly simplify those things that take up a lot of your time. And last but not the least is the multi-cloud orchestration. As I already talked earlier, that with Calm, you can automate the provisioning of your hybrid cloud architecture, scaling both multi-tiered as well as distributed applications across different cloud environments. So you can deploy these applications not just on your Nutanix private cloud, but on any public cloud of your choosing, at least the top cloud vendors that we work with. So that's the Calm story. Let's talk about a little more about what is application lifecycle management. Essentially, as IT admins and IT owners, right? Your businesses are constantly trying to improve the agility of your IT teams so that you can rapidly innovate. But what ends up happening is that, as application developers will say, right? Application deployment and delivery, it is getting very complex, and it becomes very challenging across teams to manage this complexity. So what Calm does, it helps you manage this complexity when you have numerous applications. You have fragmented ownership. So we do not want to have fragmented ownership. We want to have some policy-driven control over that, right? We don't want to have knowledge silos. If a team creates an application and it's very good, why shouldn't the other team be able to use that application? So with blueprints and published blueprints, you would be able to democratize that knowledge across your organization and make them more agile. So that's where some of the good use cases of Calm comes in. As I already talked about that, what it does, Calm is a multi-cloud application automation and lifecycle management tool, which could run on your Nutanix private cloud or any other private cloud, right? So long as there is an underlying infrastructure, Calm is able to run on top of it. And here, as you can see, it could be a traditional 3-tier infrastructure as well, or it could be one of the public clouds that you have. Now, when I talked about self-service and governance earlier, so let me dig and show you some concrete examples of what I actually mean by that. So in Calm, there's a concept of a marketplace, and because the App Store was taken away, we had to come up with the name marketplace. And a marketplace is essentially a repository of all your applications. And this could be your applications, but what we also have done in order to get you started quickly, we have pre-seeded the marketplace with very common applications which your IT teams might need. So you can see, you should be able to see some familiar logos in here for MySQL, Redis, Veeam, TensorFlow, Jenkins. So these applications are pre-published. Obviously, the IT admin can change the settings in this, but with these applications pre-published, your automation journey becomes a little quicker. Now, you don't have to create your first application because some of these applications which your team already used are already pre-canned and made for you. So let's talk about a use case of how you go about using one of these applications. So the first step is find an application that you need, right? So you log into the portal, you search for any application that you need. This could be the factory seeded, which is some of the pre-seeded applications, or this could be your enterprise application that you can create and publish on the Calm marketplace. So let's take an example. Once you select an application, you go ahead and review and launch it. So here, when you review an application, you can select the applications. You can see the details of that application, the hardware requirements, the OS and platform support for the applications, for these applications. So you can clearly see right there. And after that, what you would do is get ready to for launching your application. So you can see once you launch that application that it's actually using 3 VMs. You can view the status of that application and how is it running and the IOPS that it's using. So it's as easy, and I'll actually show you in a demo as well, that once you find and launch your application, running your application is almost just clicking a simple click. And now this is a very important part of any application lifecycle management, which is once you have an application up and running, what do you do to scale out? If you have to scale up or scale down, start, restart an application, again, because your end users would have access to this, now the IT admin doesn't have to time and again go and restart or scale up or scale down these applications. Using RBAC, which is role-based access control, you can give permissions to users to do some of these tasks all by themselves. So again, it greatly diminishes and reduces the task that you are doing, because now the end user is able to run these tasks all on by own. Something else that we have done is, because we realized a lot of our customers, especially who had infrastructure at a scale, they were ServiceNow customers as well. And we said, wouldn't it be very easy that instead the next time somebody needs a MySQL database, they just file a ServiceNow ticket, and with the Calm plugin, they get that service. So we have enabled exactly that thing. So now with the ServiceNow, the Calm plugin in ServiceNow Marketplace, what you can do is you can file a ticket. The moment that ticket is filed, the Calm plugin uses the Calm API. It goes to the marketplace and it provisions an application, the application that you require. And once that application is provisioned, it updates the CMDB database and the tickets get resolved. So delivering application becomes as easy as just filing a ticket, and you have the whole chain and you have the approval process. So this would greatly simplify any IT admin's role, because now the users can just file tickets. Either they can go to marketplace and self-provision things, or they can even, if you have ServiceNow, you can actually create tickets and file it themselves. As I said, one of the fundamental premises here is that you want to have RBAC, because Calm is very powerful in the sense that tools, the things that it allows you to do. So Calm has this inbuilt construct of 4 different personas. So operator is somebody who can perform lifecycle actions on running applications. A consumer is somebody who can launch applications from the marketplace. A developer is somebody who can actually create and publish these applications or blueprints. And admin is the super user who can add infrastructure and resources, define costs, and create and manage projects, right? So, and again, this is important because you want to have control on how the self-service is done. And obviously the integration with your Active Directory is there so that you can actually assign users to specific roles with a complete integration with your Active Directory. So that was a good example of how you can use RBAC as well as Calm to enable some of these things. So let me go into a little more detail and show you what exactly is a Calm blueprint. Essentially, blueprint, as the name suggests, that's the crux of Calm, right? With Calm, applications are defined via a simple blueprint that can be easily created and instantly deployed, right? And what blueprints incorporate are all the elements of each application. So essentially, whatever an application would need is encompassed in that blueprint. This would include VMs, associated binaries, configuration settings, and dependencies between components. What you can do is, and I will show you that the blueprints, just by their very nature, they create a visually compelling UI that dramatically simplifies the process of creating an application. So not only you can intuitively with a UI, not only you can understand what's happening, but the next time you hand off an application to somebody else, for them to take on the project becomes very easy because, as I'll show you, things are very visual, right? So let's go to the next point and actually show you how blueprints actually drive the repeatable provisioning of applications. So here's an example of, so as you will see, through a UI, it helps you make sense of the complexity in a visual way. It's very easy to understand dependencies. As you can see, here is an example of a master and a slave, and the arrow shows that the slave is actually dependent on the master here. So that also determines the order in which each of these applications would come up. What we also do is we have auto-generated system flows. So things which Blueprint can understand, it will actually show you the flow so that you can intuitively understand how the sequence in which these steps flow from the master to the slave. So here's an example that you're seeing on the screen of of a blueprint. The white boxes are VMs, so you can see the MySQL DB on the left. To the right of the box, you see the steps that are needed to configure the VM, such as installing the DB, package installs, and master create. You can see that. And the arrows are dependencies. For example, we'd like the database to start before the Apache server starts. So Apache here has a dependency on the prior entity, and that is shown via these arrows, right? So as you can see, the blueprints capture the entire process end to end in a way that's easy to understand, and it helps multiple teams collaborate. So it's very easy and intuitive to understand. Again, as I talked about earlier, we support multiple clouds. So this could be the Nutanix cloud, which is called the Xi cloud. So to run these applications in Calm, you can choose any underlying infrastructure. That could be AWS, the Xi cloud, your private cloud with Nutanix, or even other clouds that you know. Again, you can actually deploy Kubernetes. There was a lot of interest around deploying applications via containers. If you just Google Calm and CI/CD pipeline, you can actually see how we have created an example via Calm to implement the whole CI/CD pipeline, which allows the process of application update and testing in one click of a button. Like the whole process is very automated. So again, these are very good examples where Calm can automate a lot of the things which your developers have been asking you for since a long time. Let me show you an example. So the example that I'm going to show you is of infrastructure provisioning. Again, like I said, there are numerous examples which you can find online on what people have done. I wanted to keep this a little more infrastructure centric today, so I'll show you an example of how you go about provisioning a VM through Calm. So let's go. This is the next demo that I wanted to show with you guys. Okay. So essentially, again, as I showed you, you log into the Prism console. This is where, and again, Calm is, you have to realize that Calm is part of your Nutanix stack. So you don't have to install it. It's very lightweight. It's deployed as a container on Prism, so it's very easy to update as well. So here what you're seeing is once you create a Calm, it's as easy as turning on a setting in your Prism console. So again, you don't have to engage a month for an automation engagement with a third party for your automation. The learning curve is very easy. So going back, the example that I was trying to show here is as the IT admin, what you can choose is what your end users see. So let's say that end users see is an example of VMs they want to create. So they'll go to the marketplace. They can provision a CentOS VM, an Ubuntu, or a Windows VM. So again, let's say the user wants a CentOS VM. We say you define the project this VM is associated with. Now you go, you call what that VM has to be, and you click enter. And again, it takes 5 minutes. I've definitely sped it up, but once you click that, creating that VM for your end user was as simple as going to a marketplace, setting the name for that, and now you can see the VM is up and running. You saw the IP address. Now you can actually go and log into that VM into that machine right here, and there you go. So within a matter of 5 minutes, we actually we provisioned a virtual machine for your end user, and all that end user had to do is just go to a marketplace. So you can see how as IT admins and IT architects, your life becomes so much more easier once you have created these marketplaces where your users can go and self-provision things for themselves. So let me stop sharing. That was a good example of creating VMs. The numerous examples that your team can use. Now let's talk about business outcomes, right? At the end of the day, that is where your CIO and CFO are asking you to measure. Like, hey, I want things to be running and I want the business to be humming, right? So let's talk about some of the business outcomes which are also part of the Nutanix story. One thing I've consistently heard from IT admins is that they provide VMs and resources to their teams. They take those resources, they use it for a test or something, and then they forget about it. And that meter is constantly running, right? And there's essentially a cost for that. So what we have done is, this is the Xi Beam part that I was talking about earlier, is that in the Nutanix stack, you can actually define the costs that are associated with vCPUs, memories, and storage. And once that cost has been associated, what ends up happening is once you have these applications up and running, then you can actually look at what is the cost per VM, per application, and per project. So here's a good example. What you're seeing on the screen is a summary. So the next time somebody creates a VM and lets it run for a while, you know where the dollars are going. Essentially, it's the users of your resources. So it's very helpful. Not just that, if there's a particular department who is using a lot of resources, this is a tangible way of measuring what is the dollar amount. And again, because this is a custom number, you can choose whatever number that you put in there. But so long as we are tracking how these resources are being used, it's a very handy tool for you as an IT admin to say, this is the value that I delivered to your team. This is how you are using these things. This becomes very important. So again, you see the little asterisk there, and the little asterisk says that the on-prem version is in beta and it's not come out. But the cloud version is actually live, and you can actually use the cloud version. And the cloud version is actually a more relevant case because somebody who's running an EC2 instance on the cloud, that is money being spent. And that meter is constantly running. Because Amazon doesn't care if that you're not using that application. As far as Amazon is concerned, it has set aside those resources for you, and Amazon is going to bill you. So by setting those costs and tracking them, you can make sure that your IT department is not wasting important dollars across your organization. So that's, again, very important for any IT leader to show business outcomes that, hey, these are the dollars that I saved, this is where my money is being spent, and it just makes you the hero in the whole organization. That was an example of that. If you have already heard about what Nutanix does, I don't have to convince you on why Nutanix HCI with its automation is so much more better than the traditional 3-tier infrastructure story that you hear. You have a lower TCO, you have unplanned outages, you have a 5-year amazing ROI on the whole product, right? So to summarize, again, I spoke a lot, but hopefully it was helpful for you. Hopefully you were able to see compelling use cases in your day-to-day life where you can actually use this automation, right? It is not very complex. It was fairly easy to understand. I did not jump through 10 different consoles to show you something. It was just one console, which is Prism. And there you have access to both Prism Pro and Calm. So hopefully by the end of these 50 minutes, I was able to convince you how you can succeed in this rapidly evolving infrastructure and operation world. As far as Prism Pro is concerned, it helps with the task automation by removing complexities and operator errors by turning any tasks into a push button automation, because now you can automate these things, as you already saw with cross-play playbooks. It becomes very easy. Your infrastructure optimization becomes very easy because now you can immediately identify where your resources are being wasted. And at the same time, with Calm, application automation and lifecycle management becomes very easy because now you can actually help your developers to provision these applications as and when they need it. I didn't want you to take my word for that, so what I've done here is I wanted, right after this webinar, you can go to nutanix.com/test drive, and all the concepts of automation that I showed you, it's a walk me tutorial. You can walk it yourself or you can play it out for yourself. We want you to try this and realize how simple it is to try out to automate. Like, people are always scary that automation is hard. I'll have to learn 10 things. I already have 10 other alerts and I have so many things to deliver. Genuinely, this will simplify your life if you try it out once. There's an ebook here which is part of the resources which you see, which Dave already mentioned. So you can use the ebook for DevOps, so Calm and DevOps, and there are a lot of examples that you can also find on nutanix.dev on a lot of good resources on how you create a very friendly environment for your developers. That brings me to the end of this session. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
So yeah, we do have some questions for you from the audience. Great presentation, by the way. I love the live demos. So many great live demos showing how the product actually works. So let's see. First question that came in, they're asking, do you have a template for JD Edwards development client? Is that something that's there, or is it possible to create, or how would that work?
JD Edwards development client. So again, I don't have the specifics to it, but what I know is that creating templates and blueprints is fairly intuitive and straightforward. I would definitely recommend the gentleman to go to nutanix.dev and try to find it. I don't have the example to the specific case, at least on the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. No worries. I mean, you made a great point that it's super easy to create new templates, doesn't take a lot of time. So exactly. I think that's a great answer to the question. Another question here from Alan. He's asking, can we program playbooks with Ansible, Chef, or Puppet?
Oh, that's a very good point, right? So now, and I should have included that thing, right? So I know a lot of you people are using Ansible and Chef and Puppet to do that. So one of the key things around automation is having access to APIs. So we have published, just Google Nutanix APIs, and a lot of the actions that I showed to you, which Prism does, so Prism Pro does. So yeah, if you're not very savvy, again, depends. You have to balance between how much time you want to invest. If you don't want to invest a lot of time, you can use Prism Pro and automate a lot of playbooks. But if you're really the tinkerer kind of person, we have published our APIs, and through Ansible, you can actually call those APIs and still automate some of these things that I actually showed you today. Things like if there is an alert, if this, then do that. You can definitely automate that. And again, those examples, just Google them and you'll see examples of integration with Ansible. And all our APIs have been published for pretty much anything that you can do via these tools. Internally, they use the same APIs which have been published outside, so you can use those APIs as well. Very good question, and yes, you can do it.
Okay, excellent. Another question here, Michael is asking, and I know this is really technical. We might have to, get back to him on this, but what's the time period that it pulls to know that the cluster or VM is over provisioned? And my follow-up to that would be, I assume, is that configurable?
Oh, so that's a good question, right? So, and because it's a technical question, I want to actually go in a little bit of technical details. So essentially what Prism Pro is doing is it's installed as a VM on your cluster, and it's monitoring all the VMs. Historically, it looks at 21 days of data, and it senses what is besides you setting out what a work provision, it learns what a typical behavior of the infrastructure is from the last 21 days. And that's something that is, I don't think it's programmable right now, because if you make it very long, the data that it has to learn and churn at its end, the data quantity would be too much, and plus the regression that's going to run on would take a lot of CPU resources. So we found that the perfect balance between looking at something which was meaningful in terms of the day period, in terms of the resources it will consume, was around 21 days. I'll have to double check if that date is changeable, but to the best of my knowledge, it's 21. I'll take as a follow-up question to find out if we can change that and make it 90, because let's say you have something which is cyclical on a 90-day period. I can take that as an action item.
Okay, great answer. Another question here. I know that Nutanix is moving some of their offerings into SaaS services. Which of the offerings you talked about today are SaaS solutions that they could use if they don't have, Nutanix, let's say, on premises, versus solutions that you can only use if you have Nutanix on premises?
Good question. So I slightly alluded to this earlier. So again, this is part 3 of a series which is called Nutanix Private Cloud, because some of these solutions work very well with Nutanix, right? That being said, so Prism Pro, for instance, helps you manage your Nutanix infrastructure. So today, while it is on the roadmap that Prism Pro would be able to manage other infrastructures as well, I think that's for their roadmap for later this year, without committing too much. For Calm, we have a better story. Definitely, I've seen internally a SaaS versions of it, just because, as I talked about earlier, Calm allows you to have an infrastructure that is on any of the public clouds. So it immediately made sense that you don't need to have Nutanix as your primary infrastructure point. It could be many of the clouds. So on the Calm, I would say stay tuned. In the next few months, you should hear more about the Calm as a software as a service, where you can just get Calm, and it doesn't have to be part of the whole Nutanix stack.
Okay, very cool. Exciting stuff on the horizon. Another question here: how's this different from other automation tools like Terraform?
So one of the things, and again, that you saw is, and hopefully through the live demo, I was able to connect, everything was happening through the Prism window. I did not have to install something. I didn't have to jump between my infrastructure tool, my automation tool. Everything was the part of one UI. So same with Prism Pro and Calm. It's part of your dropdown. So the UI, it's very consistent. I know, without naming names, there's another tool which starts with a V and ends with an ops that runs as an 18 VM solution, and it usually takes 7 to 8 days of service agreement just to have it up and running. Versus with Prism Pro, it's a lightweight application. It runs. You can run it, and especially the playbooks, you can actually create automation within 5 minutes and be ready. So I think the learning curve that we have created for our, keeping the IT end user in mind, because we know he has to deal with 20 other things, is very shallow. You don't have a steep learning curve, unlike the other tools which are out there. So if you are in the Nutanix ecosystem, it's almost a no-brainer for you to try these out, because it's right there, it's baked in. In fact, for Prism Pro, you have a 60-day trial license. After that, we don't disable all the functionality, so you should be actually able to go ahead and play around with automation. So that's the fundamental difference. It's part of your stack. It's built right in. You don't have to learn new things, versus with a lot of other tools, there's a steep learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a great point there. So, I mean, you're not going to need 6 months and a team of 6 consultants to implement automation with this solution, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And which is why I did the live demo, because I wanted to show you how do you do it.
Excellent. So I know we've just got a minute left, but just real quickly, if somebody were to click on the test drive link that's right there in the handouts, second link down in the handouts tab, and sign up for a Nutanix test drive, can you just kind of tell us quickly what would that process be like?
Oh, absolutely. So basically, it takes you to a web page, and what ends up happening is we spin up a cluster on a cloud, on a public cloud, and we save that cluster for you for the next 4 hours. And on that cluster, it's actually a live cluster. It's like having your own Nutanix, and you can try out those automation constructs which I talked about right then and there. It's a walkthrough. You can walk through all the steps that I talked to, so you don't have to take my word on how simple it is. You have a cluster which is dedicated and specifically created for you. Go ahead, try it out, and see how easy it is to automate your infrastructure if you choose to be on Nutanix.
Very nice. Very nice. Sounds super easy to get started. I love that test drive functionality there in the cloud. Mayank, it's been great having you on the event today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to Nutanix for supporting today's event. I want to remind everyone out there to watch your email inbox for upcoming invitations. We've got 2 more events still left in this 5-part series. On March 5th, we'll be having an event entitled Protect Your Heterogeneous Application and Data Services. You want to make sure you attend that one to learn how Nutanix Private Cloud enables business continuity and disaster recovery. And then on March 19th, the final event in the series, that's where we're announcing the grand prize. The event is entitled Essential Security Considerations for Building a Private Cloud, how security is built in with the Nutanix solution. So make sure that you join those 2 upcoming events. I hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's event. I hope you learned a lot, and have a great day. We'll see you next time.